Hello, this is Mariah Cruz, and you're listening to the Spiritual Deep Dives podcast. What if the roots of today's chaos around the world trace back to the people who destroyed 2 planets in our solar system and then reincarnated here on Earth? In this episode, we're going to discover who they are, where they came from, and what they're doing on Earth today. For thousands of years, there were ancient spiritual truths and mystical teachings passed down only to the highest initiates walking the path back to God. It hasn't been until recent times that this secret knowledge has been available to the masses. Our team spent over 40 years researching many diverse spiritual, religious, and scientific sources, recording the wisdom from the ascended saints and sages of East and West, tapping into the Akashic records, and calling on God's Holy Spirit to reveal the spiritual truths and science behind the unseen forces that govern our lives. In this podcast, we will explore these teachings from a unique perspective that you probably have never heard before, and show practical ways you can integrate them into your life to resolve deep-seated personal problems, accelerate your soul's evolution, and help solve the world's dilemmas. Before we continue with this episode, if you're joining us for the first time, because of the sequential nature of this series, we recommend listening to the previous episodes first. Thank you for joining us in this series from the teachings of the Ascended Masters on fallen angels, Nephilim, and aliens. We're going to talk some more about Maldek, and also bring in another planet which was known as Hedron, because both these planets have a history together that is having a serious effect on world events today in more ways than one. The following information are revelations from the Ascended Masters to their messengers concerning the history of the solar system, which were taken from the Akashic records. You can find out what these records are all about by listening to the first episode of this series. Last time we talked about the fact that Maldek had exploded due to the misuse of nuclear energy. So now we're going to start with the story of the planet Hedron. Hedron was once a planet whose orbit was very close to the Sun. The souls who were its inhabitants were destined to outpicture the magnificent flame of divine love under the direct influence of Helios and Vesta, the rulers of this solar system. Obviously, the souls on this planet were not evolving in the same dense physical plane that we are here on Earth. They existed in a different dimension that was not subjected to the intense heat from their planet's proximity to the Sun. So these evolutions, these people of Hedron, rejoiced in the love of God and were living a wonderful life of beauty. But after a time, that rejoicing, that childlike innocence, turned to selfishness and pleasure. And so the word hedonist has descended all the way from Hedron as the sign of those who make the goal of life the pleasure of the 5 senses. The total selfish consciousness of those evolving on that planet resulted in their self-annihilation. They destroyed themselves and they destroyed their planet. Today, all that's left is an asteroid belt between the Sun and Mercury. Now here's where the planet Maldek comes in. Those who were counted worthy, the remnant of the hedonists, or the Hedrons, were allowed to re-embody on Maldek. At that time, Maldek was a very pure virgin planet. With the coming of the Hedrons, this planet eventually also became perverted through what was like a pleasure cult. The Hedrons were not a new evolution. They had great experience in science and in war, and they were able to create weapons greater than our most modern nuclear weapons, inventions greater than our most modern forms of transportation, and so they brought about a nuclear holocaust on Maldek and destroyed themselves. As mentioned before, all that remains of that planet is the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Once again, the souls of a planet were thrust out of embodiment and ended up floating on the astral plane. And once again, life provided an opportunity. The Lords of Karma determined that 2/3 of the evolutions of that entire planet were not worthy of perpetuation, so they were brought to the final judgment and passed through the second death. The 1/3 who were considered redeemable, those who were humanitarians, philanthropists, scientists, who had resisted war and inharmony, who had resisted the misuse of love, were allowed to embody upon planet Earth. Thus, the Earth is beset with a race of people who have a previous evolution of the selfish pleasure, of science, of creating babies in test tubes, of creating all forms of life, of controlling genes and chromosomes, and of waging war. These people, who are called laggards because they are lagging behind the spiritual evolution of this system of worlds, embodied on Atlantis, and they began to repeat the same way of life. And so Earth also became infested with the same pleasure cult they practiced on Hedron and Maldek. Do you notice now that the MO of the fallen ones is always the same? Anytime something happens and an evolution goes wrong or makes wrong choices, or the energy veil they create around themselves gets so great, they always fall into these same patterns. So once we know their MO, then we can predict what's going to come next if we follow their same patterns. It shouldn't be surprising that the people who embodied on Earth from those 2 destroyed planets were very fearful when we started developing nuclear power and nuclear weapons here, because they have the soul memory of what happened on their own planets. Although we're likely not at the point technologically where we could destroy this planet with a nuclear event. One thing we need to remember is when we make karma in the physical dimension, we must work it out in that same dimension. We can't be sent to the astral, mental, or etheric dimensions of a planet. These are specific karmic laws that we can't escape. We may have karma in more than one dimension though, but if we brought it down to the physical, which these laggards did by blowing their planets apart, the physical plane is where we need to work out that karma. So here we have the karmic board and the ascended masters trying to figure out where in this solar system to send these souls. They couldn't necessarily be sent to another solar system because the evolutions they have karma with are in this one. So the only way they could work this out is through the mercy of God deciding, let us give these people a chance. Let them embody on Earth, whose own evolutions also have a lot of problems, but it's in the physical dimension. So the Hedronists and the Maldekians embodied here. Now we have this very difficult scenario playing out in very long, drawn-out cycles that go on for hundreds of thousands of years. There are these 2 additional groups of laggards on Earth that cannot get along. They hate each other. And can you guess where they are embodied today? Just look at the Middle East for the answer. That area has been a powder keg for a very long time, and now we know why. The Ascended Masters tell us that the Middle East is where the laggard generations have gathered for their final war of Gog and Magog. Incidentally, we got this information from the book The Paths of Light and Darkness by Mark and Elizabeth Prophet. This is a very good read if you want to go deep into the story of the fall and the fallen ones, with even more detail than we are giving here. Some may wonder why, if the souls on Hedron were living such a wonderful life of beauty, how could they have desired anything less? Well, it was a very slow process. They didn't keep up their devotion to the real self, to the divine spark within them, so their evolution slowed. The upward spiral of evolution progresses by the momentum of self-effort. All evolutionary progress, from an ascended master up to a cosmic being or a Buddha, is the result of self-effort and the assistance of those above us, but in the final analysis, we have to do it ourselves. If we don't nourish the living flame of love, wisdom, and power that dwells in our heart, it will diminish, and we won't necessarily know to what degree we have fallen. So the people of Hedron began to desire pleasure in lower, denser planes. Why? Because they learned that in the lower spheres they could achieve notoriety and a human kind of godhood not subject to the hierarchical chain of command. They could do their own thing in these spheres. They didn't have to listen to their teachers, their mentors. They didn't have to obey. Does this sound familiar? It was the same logic we heard coming from Serpent in the Garden of Eden, which we explored in episode 9. Of course, when we cut ties to the hierarchy and stop increasing the flame within the heart, our spiritual progress stops. So they sought the fulfillment of pleasure that began with the titillation of the outer senses, instead of the stimulus of the inner sensitivities of the soul. Gradations of vibration are subtle, and the one least aware of his own fluctuations is the individual himself. It's almost no different from a child when they reach their teen years. They want to leave mum and dad and go out and enjoy pleasure, to be independent and experiment with the things in this world. They think that mum and dad don't live in their generation, and there are many new things now that they want to try. So we can see the similarity between the souls on Hedron and what parents experience with their own children. In some cases, they go way off into dark places, but the parent doesn't say, "Forget them, I'm not involved anymore." There's always the mercy of the parent that tries to woo the teen back, even though a lot of times they don't listen. They have to want to return themselves. What we're talking about here is very similar to what happened on Hedron. Even though they knew better, they decided they wanted to be independent from their teachers and mentors, from the God source. When this separation happened, the energy veil, evil, thickened around them, and they could no longer see or remember what this connection was once like because it happened so slowly and subtly. They thought they were at a certain level of attainment, but they really were no longer there. And then it became worse when these evolutions came to Earth, where we have all kinds of soulless beings that intermarried with them. The Hedrons didn't know that the person they cohabited with was soulless, so there's this whole dilemma that brought down these individuals even further. It was a very precarious situation. We think here is a good time to comment on some teachings from the book The Soulless One, which contains a series of great pearls of wisdom by the Master Rakosi, the teacher of Saint Germain and holder of the office of Great Divine Director in the spiritual hierarchy. Back in 1965, the Great Divine Director wrote, "Long ago, from certain systems of worlds came bands who descended to Earth, the hordes of shadow, who were invited here by mankind. For mankind thought, by the power of good example, to elevate the consciousness of the laggard bands." We want to point out that he said they came from certain systems of worlds, not in this solar system. This happened after the laggards from Maldek and Hedron came. As we mentioned before, the word laggard means lagging behind in spiritual development. They are highly materialistic and generally have no desire for the ascension, yet they are advanced technologically. They are brilliant, amazing individuals from a materialistic, intellectual point of view. The Master Rakosi goes on to say, "It is not so well known that these laggards were accompanied by some who were not invited. Some of these brought knowledge to mankind and to the earth, and some of this knowledge was degenerative and destructive. In addition, they also brought with them strange creatures of their own creation, seemingly intelligent beings, not created by God, but by advanced scientists on other systems of worlds." It seems we are literally living in a science fiction movie called Maya, and according to the Master Rakosi, Earth is a continuous open house. Anyone who wants to come here are welcomed by mankind, or a kind of man. Who knows exactly who invited them? We don't really know. The Ascended Masters only told us that mankind did invite them to Earth. Maybe mankind at the time didn't have a problem with inviting other evolutions to help them because they needed their higher scientific technology. Some believe that the Greys and their UFOs are here to save us with their technology, to undo all the bad things mankind has done, but this is the furthest thing from the truth. It's ridiculous to think that those creatures with the big black eyes and long arms are here to help us in any way. They are all programmed clones, and whoever created them didn't do a very good job at it. So, we're going to read again from the book The Paths of Light and Darkness. Here, Mark and Elizabeth Prophet talk about intermarriage and why mankind on Earth would invite evolutions from other systems of worlds. It says, "These robot creations already here on Earth were carefully adapted to their physical environment. They were endowed with mechanical brilliance in science, technology, and business administration." Now that's amazing. They were programmed to simulate the God-man, the people who have the divine spark and had a tie to the God source. Continuing, they tell us, "In physical structure, these robots, or mechanized men, were designed to intimidate mere mortals. Slightly taller and larger in bone structure than the average child of God, these mechanizations have a rather dead, mechanical beauty, a glassy-eyed look that has become vogue in certain circles. So the term beautiful people points to the desire of their creators to endow the flesh with a beauty and glamour all of its own, instead of making the physical body transparent for the beauty and virtue of God to shine through. We can see by this teaching is that the original understanding of the matrix of the physical body of souls of light was to be slightly transparent, and that what shone forth from within was the divine spark of the heart, the 7 centers of the body, and the auric field emanating from the individual. For example, the development of the mind would glow with a golden yellow, or the development in the healing arts would emanate an emerald green radiance. We would first see the beauty of God shining through the physical form, and therefore not place so much emphasis on the outer physical appearance. But we can clearly see today that too many are concentrating on making the physical body glamorous to the exclusion of the inner God self, if they even have one. They may look gorgeous on the outside, but spiritually, they may not even have a drop of light within them. This book also mentions that it's very difficult to differentiate between a mechanized man and the creations of God. The chief difference is discernible only with the inner eye, the third eye chakra, which many people already know about, especially in the East. Lastly, when we were talking about the problems of intermarriage, the book reads, "Intermarriage between the children of light and the children of darkness has brought about an adulteration of the divine fires within man, a weakening of the high integrity and natural morality of the sons of God, and a looseness in the codes of society that has enabled the powers of darkness to obtain a foothold of great magnitude in world affairs. It was to this end that mechanized man was created in the first place, for without the infiltration of the Luciferians and Luciferian-created mechanized man into society, the children of God would have naturally ascended into a higher consciousness. So they planned these things out for thousands and tens of thousands of years into the future. We can start to realize the diabolical but continuous MO. They do the same thing on every planet, and once we understand that, we should start using the spiritual tools that we demonstrated in episode 15 for our protection, spiritual upliftment, judgment of these fallen ones, and transmuting ancient planetary karma. We can now view past and current history and world events in the light of this tremendous knowledge that we've been given by the Ascended Masters and their messengers. We are no longer ignorant, but now see clearly what is going on. And again, what is stopping things from getting worse is the magnificent science of the spoken word and the direct invocation of the light, because we are calling directly to the great avatars, angels, and cosmic beings to come into our world and stop these fallen ones from messing up our planet any more than it has been for millions of years. Their time is up. Our time has come to step up and make our voices heard. We wanted to mention that Earth is at a crossroads. It is the only planet in this solar system that has a physical dimension of this level. The evolutions on all the other planets were not in this physical dimension. They were either taken over or their evolutions went up to a higher dimension, either Devachanic or another level of the etheric plane. We know this happened on Venus. So Earth is the last stand. In other words, this is the last planet that has a physical dimension in this solar system. This goes back to what we were saying before. We must have a physical platform to undo the physical karma that we made. That's just the way it is. It's a cosmic law that the Ascended Masters have to go by. They can't just make up something and say, well, in order to help this evolution, let's just do this. That's exactly what the Watchers did. They did not get their orders from the heavenly hierarchy. They just said, well, let's go down there and fix things ourselves and change the race. And they certainly did change the race, and we had the giants. During the time of Enoch, and even during the time of the Old Testament, there were giants. In the book of Enoch, it says these giants were 30 cubits tall, which translates to 45 feet, or over 13 meters. So we had 45-foot-tall, human-like beings infesting our planet during the time of Enoch, which was 10,000 BC or beyond. The reason they're not running around the planet today is because they were taken away through the judgment. There were so many things that God did because, as we know, evil was once very physical, even worse than it is today. We had creatures like dinosaurs that were running around at the same time mankind were, so the Brotherhood put a stop to this. They still exist on the astral plane, but we don't see these atrocities anymore on the physical. And when the judgment came down in many epochs, the crystal cord, which was once about 9 feet in diameter, was reduced to a mere thread because mankind had great powers that they misused tremendously. Black magicians would run around turning people into half man, half fish by black magic and so forth. They were very, very powerful, but we don't see that now because this was all judged and stopped. This is what the hierarchy has been doing for all of these generations, cutting them off to a certain extent, cutting the power off to the fallen ones, the fallen angels, so that they cannot create the same type of atrocities that we see in movies like Star Wars or The Lord of the Rings, where the author or screenplay writer have tapped into the Akashic records, as we explained in episode 1. These are race memories, a soul memory that they may have lived through on this or another planet. And there's also the very famous edict that we can read in the Bible that was an edict by Sanat Kumara to stop these overt atrocities that were occurring at that time, and it's still used today. It is, "For whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. But whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away even that he hath." Now the Ascended Masters have revealed that there are a few words missing out of that quote, and what it really should read like is, "For whosoever hath light, to him shall be given more light, and he shall have more abundance. But whosoever hath not the light, from him shall be taken away even that light he hath stolen." And then it says, "And there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth," which means they are going to be angry because the light that they stole, the light that they used to have, was curtailed and in some instances completely cut off. In other words, they can no longer do the things that they used to do. And yes, there are still some watchers around on the earth today, but they have nowhere near the power they had when they first ascended. In terms of judgment on the continent of Atlantis, according to the writings of the Theosophical movement, we know that due to the misuses of the sacred fire, of technology and so forth, Atlantis broke up into many islands in the Atlantic Ocean. Some islands are in the North Atlantic and others are in the Southern Atlantic, such as Cuba and the islands down in the Caribbean, which are actually remnants of part of the continent of Atlantis. In 800,000 BC, there was a breakup of the land, but then finally there was only one island left called Poseidonus. Now, the sinking of the last remnant of this island took place in 9564 BC, according to what the masters Maurya and Kuthumi in the Mahatma letters wrote. So why did it sink? Why did the hierarchy have to actually sink it? Well, to start with, this was the time of Noah. Noah lived to be 900 years old because his crystal cord was not down to a little thread, it was wider. He was a great man and a great devotee at this time. He was told, of course, to build an ark that would save him. What happened on Atlantis was that the mad scientists, if we want to call them that, which were the embodied Luciferians, laggards, and the Nephilim, again started experimenting. They merged the seed of animal with human beings, and the result was what we read about in Greek mythology: centaurs, satyrs, half man, half horse, and so forth. Again, they knew what they were doing. They were entrapping whatever light that was in mankind into an animal form, and now that light had to evolve through that form. This was obviously not a divine matrix. It was not a divine form. Some of these creations had no soul, but some of them did. In the Edgar Cayce readings, we find that in the latter part of this period, the people who were experimented on would go to the Temple of Healing on Atlantis to have these animal-like appendages removed. So it's a very complicated history, but this is the reason for the final sinking of this continent. It was taken down in one fell swoop. This was one of the most devastating historical events to occur on Earth, and the Great Flood recorded in the Bible happened because of this cataclysm. The rains occurred, tidal waves occurred, and so this is actually a part of our written history. But let's clarify that the cataclysmic actions that caused the sinking of Atlantis and the resulting Great Flood did not affect the entire planet. It only affected the Mediterranean and nearby areas. Now, as we know from previous episodes, the Nephilim were also around at that time. They also read the cycles of God, and they knew that when they started doing really insane things like they were, that there was going to be a recompense, a cataclysmic event. So when the earth started to shake and the great cataclysm on that island started, the Nephilim ran to their spacecraft, went up and circled the earth for however long they needed to wait for everything to subside, and then they came back down. Now, this may sound really crazy, but this is what happened. They actually dodged their karma, at least they thought so. They got out of this situation but are still relegated to the earth. They have to re-embody here until their time has come for them to be taken for their final judgment. So the last laugh is always with the heavenly hierarchy. In our final episode of this series, we expose the true agenda of aliens, fallen angels, and false hierarchies, and reveal why only the awakened light-bearers, armed with discernment and the power of the spoken word, can stand victorious in the Battle of Armageddon. Thank you for listening to Spiritual Deep Dives. If you like this content, please like and subscribe to our podcast. We'll catch you in the last episode of this series.